Remember that Russian offensive that was supposed to be a breakthrough, leading to the collapse of Ukrainian defensive lines in the Donbass? Well, there is an interesting report that claims it was actually one big trap from Ukraine all along. That Kyiv was aware of what was happening and just sitting around, waiting to play the reverse card. And if you do not find that to be interesting enough by itself, I think it is worth understanding the deeper strategic implications that the surface level reports leave out. I will leave a link to the article in the comments. Bear in mind that I have no ability to independently verify any of this. It is possible that this is all just one giant Ukrainian psyop, that Ukraine, in fact, did see a legitimate breach in its front lines, and is now trying to play it off like it is no big deal. Then again, there is one observable feature that suggests that the trap story is plausible, and so it is worth exploring that further. Actually, let's look at that now with a recap of what happened. When we last examined the situation near two key cities in Donetsk, Russia had made a significant advance northeast of Pokrovsk, picking up about 100 square kilometers in a few days, which is a much, much faster pace than what has transpired over the past handful of months. Now, publicly, what appeared to be happening was a breach of Ukraine's forward lines, and there was potential for so much more because Russia was approaching Ukraine's main fortifications, which could have led to much larger losses either to the west or the east as a consequence of a domino effect. Again, publicly, we were further led to believe that Ukraine lacked sufficient manpower to plug the hole, which also contributed to how the breach happened in the first place. That pretty much situates where we were the last time that we analyzed the situation, with some words of caution from me that it was still a developing situation. A bunch more things needed to happen before it was truly a disaster for Ukraine, and there was still a lingering question about whether domino effects can happen at all in situations like this, now that drones make up a good portion of defensive fortifications. What we know from Ukrainian announcements and verifiable information about frontline movements as of now is that elements of the Azov Brigade came in and cut Russian troops off right at the salient, and the remaining Russian troops that may still be at the top are either in an unwinnable position or are already gone. Kyiv claims that there were 385 Russian soldiers eliminated and 37 Russian vehicles destroyed. Note that a lot of the vehicles used now are motorcycles, so those materiel destruction figures may not be as impressive as they first sound. Now, back to the claims in the aforementioned article, published by The Telegraph. This was allegedly a Ukrainian trap all along. That is, Ukraine had observed Russian troops congregating in the area, thanks to its massive drone surveillance network. Ukraine then let those troops advance because there were enough Ukrainian troops lying in wait to cut the salient and essentially create a kill zone. I want to be crystal clear about this. I have no way to know whether the Telegraph's reporting is true, and the article itself is light on the details of how the reporters know this, so we do not even have a source to scrutinize. The only real evidence that we can corroborate here is how quickly Ukraine reacted to the situation, and reversed what seemed like a potential disaster into a quick win, which is hard to square if this was not a setup. And that all assumes that the line of control is not still fluid, which is a heroic assumption in an increasingly thick fog of war. But what I can speak further to is what this claim means for the general strategic situation in Ukraine. First, let's talk about Kyiv's use of the Azov Brigade. They are essentially the elite firefighters of Ukraine's defensive line. They go wherever there is a potential breach and extinguish whatever they can. Good firefighters are key to long-term success when playing a game of defense in depth, as Ukraine currently is. However, it seems that Kyiv was using them in a more offensive role this time. At least so far, it seems to have paid off. But there is a genuine risk when you send your firefighters out to be doing what should be police patrols. If a fire does start somewhere else, then they are tied down and may not be able to respond in time. It seems that the gamble paid off because Russia has not managed any legitimate breakthroughs elsewhere that would punish Ukraine for allocating resources around Pokrovsk. The point is that even if Kyiv had planned this trap, it did not come without risk. Actually, we can extend that sense of risk to the operation itself and put it in the broader context of the intelligence game and Ukraine's drone coverage. It is not just that Ukraine spotted the clump of Russian soldiers about to push forward. It is that Ukraine was confident that Russia had not spotted any movements of Ukrainian counterforces that planned to spring the trap. Otherwise, Russia could have just withheld the attack on that position, thereby tying up Azov from handling any other fires that hypothetically could have happened but never did. Moreover, Ukraine needed to be confident that Russia was not hiding an even larger contingent nearby that could make a trap out of Ukraine's trap, basically taking Ukraine's reverse card and reversing it right back. This is the nature of intelligence in the new era of drones, and it is only a matter of time before we start observing this level of one-upmanship on the battlefield. Speaking of New Age intelligence dilemmas, think about what the trap says regarding the next time that something like this is in the making. For example, imagine that Russian intelligence spots what it thinks is another gap in Ukraine's forward positions. Now, is it actually a gap? Maybe. Or maybe it is another trap. Russia sends a few soldiers out to probe for an opening, as is the usual game plan. They do not see anything wrong, so they call in reinforcements. But, in fact, Ukraine had forces quietly hiding both around and on top of those positions. Suddenly, those Russian soldiers are permanently removed from the map. And because the disinformation space never ends, that raises some questions about the authenticity of the claim that all of this was premeditated. It is possible that Ukraine was in fact caught off guard, but that the Azov Brigade managed to salvage the situation despite the poor odds. Perhaps the drone intelligence system is not nearly as robust as the prior speculation made it out to be. Consequently, Ukraine wants to instill more caution in Russian command, precisely because the next breakthrough may lead to serious domino effects. Well, then a false claim of having trapped Russian soldiers is exactly the type of posturing you would want to adopt, taking advantage of the situation and the fact that you had a good outcome to this despite all of the bad lead-up. I do not know whether that is true or not, of course, but welcome to the conspiratorial nature of warfare. You know, drone surveillance gets a lot of discussion in the news, but I still do not think it is well understood. Heck, I do not think I understand it as well as I should. However, I have been working on something special to get a better grasp of the situation. I'm talking about real big picture here. Unfortunately, that is a tale for another day. Next up, switching back to the "it truly was a trap" mindset, the operation gives us new information about Ukraine's manpower deficiency. The basic narrative right now is that Ukraine has been short on manpower for almost 2 years running, but has found a way to use drones to offset some of the disadvantages. This has been a contentious point in the West for the same amount of time, with a chicken and egg problem. Some coalition partners believe that Ukraine cannot effectively use military aid without more warm bodies, but neither is making the first move. Well, I do not think that the trap in Pokrovsk tells us that Ukraine's manpower problems have come to an end. But maybe they are not as bad as the public perception suggests, with members of Azov to spare. That might help explain the lack of other breakthroughs so far while this has been happening. It is not for a lack of Russia trying, but rather because Ukraine can seal all of the damage as usual. One other quick point to make about the timing of the strategy here. It was concurrent with the Anchorage summit between Putin and Trump. There was a public-facing risk that Trump might have seen that Ukraine was facing an impending disaster, and then adopted his mediation position accordingly, at pretty much the worst possible moment in the war so far. Again, that is a pretty major risk for only a few hundred Russian losses as the upshot. Perhaps there was some private communication between Washington and Kyiv that this was all a trap. But the intelligence and operational security bridges between the two capitals was burnt during the Biden administration, and it goes without saying that things have not improved under Trump. But it seems to have worked out this time, because not much ultimately happened at the summit, and Ukraine inflicted the casualties that it was looking for. One last point about the value of this as a propaganda win. I do not think that Ukraine succeeded on this front in perhaps the way that Kyiv would have hoped. The news media's focus on Ukraine was wall-to-wall for the 24 hours that flanked the summit. Consequently, there was a lot of discussion about the apparent Russian breakthrough in the east. Broad media interest in the war fell off of a cliff after that, especially following the Washington summit with European leaders. As a result, the average voter in the United States is not going to be hearing about the tactical brilliance of the strategy. Yes, try as I might, my videos do not receive 300 million viewers. In turn, this will not be the same type of propaganda win as something like the Kursk offensive was, or Operation Spiderweb, or bridge attacks, or take your pick. The good news for Ukraine is that polling shows Republican voters are increasingly wanting to send more aid to Ukraine, so it is possible that the media's coverage here is not all that important, even if public perception is usually what drives the day. Meanwhile, the public perception is that I am going to end this video by discussing a couple of excellent books about the war. But no. I took a mental health morning before producing this video, and you know what? I really enjoyed it. So let's all share in my moment of zen with my relaxing view before descending back into the chaos of modern warfare.